Chapter 1. The Human Illusion of Honesty. Imagine sitting across from someone you have trusted for 2 decades. Let us call him Marcus. He has been the financial bedrock of your small business, the godfather to your children, the man who stood by you during the leanest, most terrifying years of your life. You are looking at a minor discrepancy in the company accounts, a trivial anomaly that you bring up not as an accusation, but as a passing point of curiosity. You expect a swift, boring explanation. Instead, Marcus shifts awkwardly in his chair. He asks for a glass of water, his voice suddenly tight. He begins to talk at length about his recent dedication to a local charity, completely sidestepping your question. And then, after an hour of agonizing, gentle probing, the facade shatters. He confesses that he has been siphoning funds for 10 years. The deepest shock in that moment does not come from the missing money. The shock comes from the horrifying realization that you sat across from a fiction for a decade and never saw the truth. How could you possibly miss it? You missed it because you were looking through the profound, comforting lens of human illusion. We do not believe lies because we are foolish. We believe them because we desperately want to. From the time we are young children, society drills into us the absolute sanctity of truth. We are taught that lying is the ultimate moral failing, a severe breach of the social contract. Because we hold honesty in such high regard, we naturally project that same moral compass onto others, operating on the default assumption that people are innocent until proven guilty. When someone looks you in the eye and swears they have done nothing wrong, your deepest biological and psychological biases scream at you to believe them. To call someone a liar feels like a profound violation of social norms. It requires us to sit in judgment of another human being, a position most of us find deeply uncomfortable and emotionally taxing. Yet, the psychological reality is far darker. Research suggests that the average person lies numerous times every single day, often weaving small, self-serving untruths to avoid hurt or conflict. People will lie to you if they believe it serves their best interest, and they will absolutely lie if they believe they can get away with it. When we try to figure out if someone is telling the truth, we are fundamentally attempting to analyze communication. But human communication is a chaotic, messy landscape. We are constantly bombarded with words, vocal tones, physical gestures, and subtle postures all at once. The vast majority of this daily communication is entirely nonverbal. For generations, society has handed down behavioral myths disguised as reliable wisdom. We are told that a liar cannot look you in the eye, that they fidget nervously, or that they sit with their arms defensively crossed. Yet when we rely on these deeply ingrained myths, we are merely guessing because there is no true empirical evidence to support them as definitive proof of deception. A person might cross their arms simply because the room is cold, or break eye contact because they are naturally shy. When you try to absorb and evaluate every single movement and word a person makes, a flawed strategy known as global behavior assessment, you are trying to drink from a fire hose. The human brain quickly becomes overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data, making it impossible to accurately process reality. Because we cannot physically process this fire hose of information, our minds quietly default to our inescapable biases. Biases are not inherently malicious. They are simply the mental shortcuts we take to make sense of an overwhelmingly complex world. If you interview a soft-spoken, tearful victim of a tragic accident, your natural empathy creates a powerful halo effect, shielding them from your objective scrutiny. Conversely, if you speak to someone who is brash, defensive, and generally unlikable, your bias eagerly highlights every perceived flaw. You do not have the luxury of checking your biases at the door when you step into a difficult conversation. To truly see the world as it is and to accurately perceive honesty and deception, you must learn to step outside of this mental static. You must recognize that human behavior is not always logical, and it rarely conforms to our neat moral expectations. What makes sense to us is merely a reflection of our own personal moral compass, not an objective truth about how another human being operates. The journey you are embarking on now is about systematically stripping away the comforting illusions we have all lived with. It is about replacing blind intuition with a disciplined, objective lens. There is no such thing as a human lie detector. No individual possesses a magical superpower to simply look at a person and know their soul beyond question. However, there is a distinct, proven way to filter out the overwhelming noise safely manage your inescapable biases, and focus entirely on the precise signals that reveal the hidden truth. The moment you accept that deception is a constant presence, and that the process of finding the truth is an objective endeavor rather than a moral judgment, you take your first powerful step out of the dark. You are no longer guessing at shadows. You are finally ready to listen, completely and truly, to what the world is actually telling you. Chapter 2. The Deception Paradox and the Core Methodology. There is a principle in the art of understanding human behavior that sounds entirely backward the first time you hear it. It feels counterintuitive, perhaps even a little cynical, but it is the absolute bedrock of seeing the world clearly. If you truly want to know if someone is lying to you, you must systematically learn to ignore their truthful behavior. This is the deception paradox. We are naturally conditioned to absorb every piece of information a person offers us, acting like human vacuum cleaners trying to suck in as much data as possible to make a fair judgment. But when we do this, we drown in a sea of irrelevant facts, and we make ourselves incredibly vulnerable to a very specific, highly effective form of manipulation. Imagine a scenario involving a trusted community leader, someone who has managed the finances of a local charitable organization for years. Suspicions arise about a significant sum of money missing from the charity's accounts. When confronted in a quiet, private meeting, this leader does not immediately and forcefully declare that he did not take the money. Instead, he leans forward, his voice thick with emotion, and reminds you of the countless weekends he spent building the neighborhood playground in the freezing rain. He shows you photographs of the community center he helped fund out of his own pocket. He speaks passionately about his deep faith, his devoted family, and his pristine reputation in the town. Every single thing he is telling you in that moment is absolutely, undeniably true. This is what we call the strategy of convincing versus conveying. When the facts of a situation are not a person's ally, they cannot convey truthful information about the event in question. Instead, they pivot. They attempt to convince you of their inherent goodness, hoping to wrap themselves in a halo of morality so blinding that you simply cannot imagine them committing the act they are accused of. If you allow yourself to process this truthful behavior, your natural biases take over. You admire people who build playgrounds. You respect people who love their families. Your brain immediately begins to advocate for them, whispering that such a fundamentally good person could never be a thief. By forcing yourself to ignore these truthful, halo-creating statements, you strip away the emotional manipulation. You recognize that his charity work, while noble, has absolutely nothing to do with the missing bank funds. You filter out the noise, which allows the actual deception to stand out in sharp relief. Once you clear away the clutter of truthful deflection, you must apply a disciplined framework to the conversation. Finding the truth is not about relying on a mystical gut feeling. It is about recognizing the fundamental mechanics of cause and effect. In any critical conversation, every question you ask is a stimulus, and everything the person does immediately afterward is a response. If a person is harboring a lie, your targeted question will cause a sudden, involuntary spike in their internal anxiety. Their mind must scramble to suppress the truth, invent a plausible fiction, and deliver it convincingly. This immense cognitive load creates cracks in their outward demeanor. Your job is not to passively listen, but to actively present a clear stimulus and then surgically observe the response. To observe that response accurately, you must adhere to the unforgiving rule of timing. When you ask a question, the first deceptive behavior must occur within the first 5 seconds after the stimulus is delivered. The human brain operates at an astonishing speed, processing thoughts exponentially faster than the mouth can speak them. If you ask a question and 10 or 15 seconds pass before the person shifts uncomfortably or stammers, their brain has already traveled miles away from your original inquiry. They might suddenly be worrying about a completely unrelated problem in their life. By restricting your window of analysis to those crucial first 5 seconds, you firmly tether the behavioral reaction to the exact question you just asked. You remove the guesswork, confident that their anxiety was caused by your stimulus. Capturing these rapid reactions requires you to shift how you naturally experience the world. As human beings, we tend to be either visually dominant or auditorily dominant at any given moment. We are either intensely focused on what we are seeing or deeply tuned into what we are hearing. To truly read a situation, you must consciously force your brain into a state of simultaneous observation, a dual-channel processing where you are aggressively looking and listening at the exact same time. Your brain will actively fight you on this. It is exhausting, and after a few minutes your mind will desperately try to default back to a single sense. But in those critical 5 seconds following your question, you must demand that your brain process the complete picture. You must listen to the hesitation in their voice while simultaneously watching the sudden stillness in their hands. Even when you are in this heightened state of awareness, you must protect yourself against jumping to false conclusions over a single anomaly. This brings us to the rule of clusters. If you ask a difficult question and the person simply clears their throat within the first 5 seconds, you must ignore it. A single behavior means absolutely nothing on its own. They might just have a dry throat or a nervous habit they have carried since childhood. However, if they clear their throat, repeat your question back to you and abruptly shift their posture, you are no longer looking at a random habit. You are looking at a cluster. A cluster is any combination of 2 or more deceptive behaviors occurring in response to the stimulus. The more behaviors that stack together within that tight window of time, the higher your confidence can be that you have struck a nerve. When you combine the paradox of ignoring the truth with the strict discipline of timing, simultaneous observation, and behavioral clusters, you stop being a passive participant in your own life. You stop relying on wild guesses and emotional biases. You become like a highly trained surgeon. When a surgeon removes an ailment, they do not indiscriminately damage the healthy surrounding tissue. They use precise tools to isolate the exact source of the problem. By controlling your focus and mapping the precise reactions to your words, you preserve the dignity of the conversation while gracefully navigating your way to the hidden truth. Chapter 3. The Soundtrack of Deception. There is a distinct, rhythmic soundtrack to human honesty. When a person is telling the truth, their words generally flow with a spontaneous, effortless momentum. They do not have to search for the right phrasing to describe a memory, because the memory already exists. The truth is simply a matter of retrieval. But when a person decides to deceive you, that natural soundtrack is violently interrupted. They must suddenly become the architect of an illusion, carefully constructing a narrative that sounds plausible while desperately avoiding the perilous trap of the actual facts. If you learn to listen closely, not just to the words themselves, but to the structure, the hesitations, and the specific choices of phrasing, you will begin to hear the unmistakable discordant symphony of a lie. To truly understand what deception sounds like, we must first realize that lies come in 3 distinct forms, each requiring a different kind of auditory camouflage. The most obvious is the lie of commission. This is the bald-faced, direct fabrication. It is the teenager looking their mother in the eye and claiming they were at the library when they were actually at a party. Interestingly, this is the rarest type of lie. For most human beings, looking directly at someone they care about and delivering a complete, unapologetic fiction is emotionally agonizing. It violates our deepest social conditioning. Because the lie of commission is so painful to deliver, the human mind almost always defaults to a less confrontational strategy. The lie of omission or the lie of influence. The lie of omission is a masterpiece of empty space. It is not about what the person tells you, it is entirely about what they meticulously carve out of the narrative. Imagine asking a business partner how a crucial meeting with a wavering client went. They enthusiastically tell you about the great dinner they had, the excellent rapport they built over drinks, and the brilliant presentation they delivered. They paint a vivid, truthful picture of the evening. What they conveniently omit is the 5-minute conversation at the end of the night where the client unequivocally stated they were taking their business elsewhere. The partner did not tell a single direct lie, but they successfully deceived you by leaving the truth on the cutting room floor. Even more powerful, however, is the lie of influence. When a person cannot rely on the facts, they will intuitively try to manage your perception of who they are. They want to influence you into believing that they are fundamentally incapable of the wrongdoing in question. If you ask a trusted employee if they accidentally leaked a confidential internal memo, an honest person whose facts are their ally will give you a swift, definitive no. But a person harboring a lie will struggle to cross that bridge. Instead, they will attempt to wrap themselves in a halo of integrity. They will say, "I have worked for this company for 15 years, and I value our privacy policies above everything else." Every word of that statement might be technically true, but it is not an answer to your question. It is an emotional deflection designed to make you feel guilty for even asking. This struggle to deliver a direct denial is one of the most glaring auditory indicators of deception. When confronted with an accusation, a truthful person wants the fact of their innocence known immediately. They will say, "I did not do it." But the deceptive mind rebels against this absolute statement. Instead of denying the act, they will offer a hollow substitute. They will offer a non-specific denial, saying something like, "I would never do anything like that." Notice the subtle psychological distance in that phrase. By saying, "I would never do something like that," the person is letting themselves off the hook. They are talking about their general character in a hypothetical future rather than addressing the specific reality of the past. It is a profound failure to deny, dressed up as righteous indignation. You will also hear the sound of the brain frantically buying time. A lie requires immense cognitive processing power. The brain must suppress the truth, invent a fiction, ensure the fiction does not contradict any known facts, and then command the mouth to deliver it smoothly. This takes time the person does not naturally have when a question is hanging in the air. To fill the awkward, incriminating silence, the deceptive person will often repeat your question back to you. If you ask, "Where did you go after you left the office?" and they reply, "Where did I go after I left the office?" Well, they are not clarifying your words. They heard you perfectly the first time. They are simply using their mouth to buy their brain 20 seconds of vital construction time. You will hear this same stalling tactic in non-answer statements such as, "That is a really great question," or "I am so glad you brought that up." It sounds like eager cooperation, but it is actually the sound of a mind scrambling to build a bridge over a chasm of guilt. When the naked lie feels too vulnerable, a deceptive person will often attempt to clothe it in garments of exaggerated respectability. You must be deeply attentive to sudden, uncharacteristic shifts in politeness or morality. If you are having a casual conversation with an old friend about a missing sum of money from a joint investment, and they suddenly begin addressing you with formal reverence or interjecting odd compliments about your family, your internal alarms should sound. They are using politeness to artificially inflate their likability, hoping your affection will override your objectivity. Even more extreme is the invocation of the divine. When a person suddenly declares, "I swear to God," or "on my mother's life," without being prompted, they are engaging in the ultimate form of dressing up the lie. They are fully aware that their factual foundation is crumbling, so they are attempting to crush your skepticism with the sheer, overwhelming weight of a sacred vow. Similarly, listen closely for the quiet, insidious use of qualifiers. Words like basically, for the most part, fundamentally, or to be perfectly honest, are rarely used by accident. They are linguistic escape hatches. If you ask someone if they have finished a critical report and they reply, "Basically, yes," they have just told you that the report is not finished. They have answered your question truthfully in their own mind by carving out a massive exception with a single word. They have preserved their psychological comfort while entirely misleading you about the reality of the situation. Perhaps the most impenetrable shield in the entire auditory landscape of deception is the sudden onset of selective memory. When a person looks at you and says, "Not to the best of my recollection," or "I do not recall that happening," they have deployed a nearly flawless psychological alibi. It is incredibly difficult to prove that a person actually remembers something they claim to have forgotten. But when this selective amnesia is deployed conveniently around the most critical consequential moments of a narrative, while their memory of irrelevant details remains crystal clear, you are no longer listening to a failing memory. You are listening to a highly strategic defense mechanism. Learning to hear this soundtrack will profoundly change the way you navigate the world. You will stop being hypnotized by the melody of a person's charm and begin to hear the discordant, underlying notes of their evasion. You will realize that when a person fails to answer the exact question you asked, it is almost never an accident. The truth does not need to hide behind qualifiers, stall tactics, or unprompted vows of morality. The truth is simple, direct, and unadorned. When you tune your ear to catch the subtle echoes of omission and the loud gongs of deflection, you strip away the deceiver's greatest weapon. You force them to stand in the quiet, undeniable light of exactly what they are refusing to say. Chapter 4. The Weapon of Influence. There is a specific kind of lie that does not sound like a lie at all. It does not sound evasive, it does not sound hesitant, and it certainly does not sound false. In fact, it sounds exactly like the absolute, undeniable truth. It is the most sophisticated, powerful, and profoundly dangerous form of deception in the human arsenal. We call it the lie of influence. To understand how it works, you must understand that when a person is trapped, when the actual objective facts of a situation are pointing directly at their guilt, they cannot use the facts to defend themselves. The truth is no longer their ally, it is their executioner. Therefore, they must completely change the battlefield. They must stop trying to convey information about what happened and instead start trying to convince you of who they are. Imagine a highly respected, deeply beloved high school teacher. Let us call him Mr. Harrison. He is the kind of teacher who arrives an hour early, stays 2 hours late, and dips into his own modest salary to buy winter coats for students who cannot afford them. He is practically an institution in his community. One afternoon, a serious allegation arises. A struggling student's failing grade was mysteriously changed in the computer system, allowing them to maintain their athletic scholarship, and the digital footprint leads back to Mr. Harrison's terminal. When the principal sits him down behind closed doors and gently asks if he altered the grade, Mr. Harrison does not look away. He maintains steady eye contact. His voice thickens with genuine, palpable emotion. He says, "I have dedicated my entire adult life to the children of this town. I have sacrificed my weekends, my savings, and my own family time to make sure these kids have a future. Do you honestly believe I would throw away my integrity, my career, and everything I have built over 20 years for one test score?" If you are sitting across from him, your heart immediately aches for him. Your natural human empathy rushes to his defense. You think of the winter coats, the long hours, the countless students he has helped. You feel a profound sense of guilt for ever suspecting him, and you quickly apologize for the misunderstanding, but look closely at what just happened. Did Mr. Harrison ever say, "I did not change the grade"? No, he did not. He delivered a masterpiece of influence. Every single word he spoke was absolutely true. He has dedicated his life to the students. He has sacrificed his weekends. He has built a sterling reputation. He took all of those beautiful, undeniable truths and wove them into a blinding halo, daring you to look past it. He weaponized his own goodness to manage your perception, completely sidestepping the factual reality of the computer terminal. These convincing statements are devastatingly effective because they exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. We desperately want the world to make sense. We want good people to do good things, and we want to believe that a person's past noble actions guarantee their future morality. When someone wraps themselves in their reputation, their religion, their love for their family, or their long history of hard work, they are building a fortress of virtue around their deception. If they say, "I am a fiercely loyal husband, I would never do something to hurt my family," or "My word is my bond, ask anyone in this town," they are giving you a psychological off-ramp. They are offering you a comfortable, socially acceptable reason to drop the interrogation and walk away. But once you recognize the lie of influence, you realize that an innocent person does not need to build a fortress. If you ask an innocent person if they stole money from the register, they do not give you a resume of their moral achievements. They simply tell you that they did not take the money. They convey the facts because the facts are on their side. A deceptive person relies on convincing statements because the facts have abandoned them. They will often string these statements together, stacking one undeniable truth on top of another. They will remind you of their faith, their years of service, their impeccable record. In the disciplined framework of behavioral analysis, every one of these convincing statements is a massive red flag. When you hear two of them back to back, you are no longer just looking at a nervous habit. You are looking at a deliberate, calculated cluster of deception. The most difficult challenge you will face is not simply hearing these convincing statements, but knowing how to safely navigate through them without destroying the conversation. If you aggressively challenge their halo, if you look at Mr. Harrison and say, "I do not care about the winter coats, I think you are lying," you will instantly trigger a catastrophic defensive reaction. They will feel genuinely insulted, and they will use your aggression to cast themselves as the persecuted victim. They will shut down completely, and the truth will be lost forever. To defeat the weapon of influence, you must learn the art of psychological neutralization. When a deceiver presents you with a blinding truth about their character, You do not fight it. You absorb it, you validate it, and then you step right past it. You use their own momentum against them. If a person says, "I have worked at this company for 20 years and I am an honest man," you look them in the eye and say, "You are absolutely right. Everyone here respects your 20 years of service, and nobody is questioning your dedication to this company. That is exactly why we need your help to clear up this discrepancy. Now walk me through exactly what happened with that account on Tuesday." Do you see the elegance in that maneuver? You have not accused them. You have not belittled their reputation. You have gracefully caught the weapon they threw at you, lowered it to the ground, and returned the conversation precisely to the perilous territory they were trying to escape. You deliver the message, entirely under the radar, that their moral halo is acknowledged, but it is not going to serve as a distraction. You have stripped them of their armor without firing a single shot. Mastering this requires profound emotional discipline. You must teach your brain to separate a person's character from the specific actions under question. A person can be a wonderful parent, a devoted community leader, and a generous friend, and still have made a terrible, compromising mistake in a moment of weakness. When you learn to listen past the halo, when you refuse to be blinded by the brilliant, irrelevant truths a deceiver offers you, you take back control of your own perception. But be warned, when you neutralize a deceiver's greatest weapon, and they suddenly realize their charm and their reputation are no longer protecting them, they will feel the walls closing in. And a human being who feels completely cornered rarely surrenders quietly. They usually reach for something much sharper. Chapter 5. The Wrath of the Cornered. There is a primal instinct buried deep within our biology that governs how we react when we are trapped. When a wild animal finds itself backed into a corner with no visible avenue of escape, it does not simply sit down and surrender. It bares its teeth, it makes itself appear larger, and it attacks with a ferocious, desperate energy. Human beings, despite our layers of civilization and social graces, operate on the exact same psychological hardware. When a person is harboring a significant deception and suddenly realizes that the facts are closing in around them, they experience a profound internal crisis. Their carefully constructed narrative is collapsing, their escape routes are blocked, and the panic of impending exposure sets in. In that terrifying moment, many people will abandon all attempts at gentle persuasion and instinctively reach for a much sharper weapon. They will go on the offensive. Imagine sitting at your kitchen table, holding a piece of undeniable evidence, perhaps a strange financial document or a troubling message that points to a serious betrayal by your romantic partner. Your heart is pounding, but you manage to ask a gentle, direct question about what you have found. You brace yourself for a lengthy explanation, a tearful confession, or perhaps a defensive denial. What you absolutely do not expect is for them to suddenly slam their hand on the table, stand up, and begin screaming at you. They hurl insults about your deepest insecurities, they accuse you of being pathologically paranoid, and they express profound disgust that you would ever dare to violate their privacy. The venom is so sudden, so intensely personal, and so completely disproportionate to your calm question that you are knocked entirely off balance. Before you know it, you are retreating. You find yourself apologizing for bringing it up, desperately trying to calm them down and restore peace. If you do this, they have won. They have successfully executed one of the most brutal and effective maneuvers in the deceptive playbook, the wrath of the cornered. When a deceptive person launches a personal attack, it is crucial to understand that it has absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own survival. The attack is a brilliant psychological smokescreen. By lashing out and questioning your competence, your sanity, or your right to ask the question, they are deliberately changing the rules of the engagement. They want to shift the spotlight off their highly questionable actions and shine a harsh, blinding light onto your perceived flaws. If they can make you doubt yourself, if they can make you feel guilty, stupid, or out of line, you will naturally back away from the treacherous territory of the truth. They will attack your authority, asking who gave you the right to interrogate them. They will attack your character, claiming you have always been suspicious and negative. Every insult is a calculated attempt to make the process of finding the truth so painful and emotionally exhausting that you simply give up. There is another, slightly more insidious variation of this wrath that does not sound like anger at all. It masquerades as inappropriate levity. It is the chilling, dismissive smirk. Suppose you confront a business associate about a massive, devastating shortfall in the company accounts. Instead of expressing shock, concern, or righteous indignation, they lean back in their chair, chuckle, and tell you that you are taking everything far too seriously. They attempt to turn a grave, life-altering situation into a trivial joke. This inappropriate level of concern is just as aggressive as a screaming match. It is a form of profound condescension designed to diminish the magnitude of their lie and to make you feel foolish for caring so deeply. By treating the accusation as a laughing matter, they are launching a subtle emotional assault, daring you to overreact and play the role of the hysterical accuser. When the deceiver feels that a direct personal attack or a dismissive laugh might be too risky, they will often resort to attacking the process itself. These are the procedural complaints. They become sudden, aggressive sticklers for the rules. They will demand to know why you are asking them these questions right now, instead of tomorrow. They will complain about the tone of your voice, the location of the conversation, or how much time the discussion is taking. "I am not going to sit here and be interrogated in my own home after a long day at work," they might say. This is the tactic of a lawyer who knows they have no evidence, so they argue the technicalities of the law instead. By constantly complaining about how the conversation is happening, they successfully avoid participating in what the conversation is actually about. They are trying to dictate the terms of their own surrender, hoping you will grow so frustrated with their roadblocks that you abandon the pursuit entirely. The most extreme manifestation of this cornered desperation is the outright threat. When a deceiver feels that all other avenues of deflection have failed, they may threaten to completely scorch the earth. An employee might threaten a devastating lawsuit. A partner might threaten to walk out the door and never allow you to see your children again. In some of the most harrowing situations, they may even threaten to harm themselves, emotionally holding you hostage to ensure your silence. These threats are the ultimate bludgeons of influence, designed to instill such overwhelming fear that the search for the truth is immediately aborted in favor of damage control. When you encounter this kind of wrath, whether it is a screaming attack, a condescending laugh, a procedural roadblock, or a devastating threat, your natural human instinct will be to de-escalate. You will want to defend yourself, to argue back, or to apologize and smooth things over. You must actively fight this instinct. You must recognize the wrath for exactly what it is, the highest possible indicator of their internal stress. The louder they yell, the closer you are to the nerve. The more vicious their attack, the more terrified they are of what you have discovered. When the deceiver goes on the attack, your most powerful weapon is an unbreakable, absolute calm. You do not absorb their anger, and you do not match their volume. You let their rage wash over you, recognizing it as the frantic thrashing of a failing lie. You wait for them to finish their tirade. You look them in the eye, and you calmly and gently repeat your original question. You show them that their smoke and mirrors have not worked, that their emotional terrorism has failed, and that the only way out of the corner is through the truth. When they realize that their wrath cannot move you, the fight will leave them, and the real conversation can finally begin. Chapter 6. The Physicality of a Lie. Think of the human brain as an incredibly powerful but ultimately limited biological supercomputer. Under normal, truthful conditions, it operates with quiet efficiency. The memory retrieves a fact, the vocal cords vibrate, and the mouth delivers the information. It is a seamless, low-energy process. But the moment a person chooses to deceive you, they are effectively opening a dozen massive, demanding applications on that internal computer all at once. They must suppress the actual memory, fabricate a plausible alternative narrative, constantly monitor your face to see if you are believing the fiction, and manage their own rising terror of getting caught. This creates an immense cognitive overload. When the brain is running that hot, the excess nervous energy has to go somewhere. It cannot stay trapped in the skull. It leaks out, traveling down the nervous system and manifests as involuntary physical movement. The mouth may be constructing a flawless, convincing alibi, but the body is screaming the truth. To read this physical language of deception, you must first understand the concept of anchor points. Right now, as you listen to this, your body is anchored to your environment in several distinct ways. Your feet are resting on the floor, your back is pressed against a chair, perhaps your forearms are resting on a desk. These are your anchor points. When an honest person is engaged in a comfortable conversation, their anchor points are generally stable. However, When you ask a targeted, difficult question and the person's internal anxiety spikes, their primal fight-or-flight mechanism is instantly triggered. The deep biological brain does not care that they are sitting in a polite office meeting. It simply senses a lethal threat and screams at the body to escape. Because they cannot socially acceptable stand up and sprint out of the room, that explosive urge to flee gets compressed into sudden, sharp disruptions of their anchor points. Watch for the person who, within 5 seconds of your question, abruptly shifts their entire weight in their chair, violently breaking their anchor to the seat. Watch for the feet that were resting flat on the floor suddenly pulling back and wrapping tightly around the legs of the chair as if bracing for a physical impact. Look for the hands that were resting calmly on the table suddenly pulling back into the lap. These are not just random fidgets. This is the body physically pulling away from the stimulus. It is the literal, physical manifestation of evasion. They are subconsciously trying to create distance between themselves and the dangerous question you just laid on the table between you. As the cognitive load continues to crush them, the deceiver will experience an overwhelming subconscious need to soothe themselves. In the absence of a comforting friend or a protective parent, they will literally try to comfort themselves through what we call pacifying or grooming behaviors. Imagine you are questioning a contractor about why the materials for your home renovation have not arrived, despite the massive deposit you paid. As he explains the completely unavoidable, highly complicated supply chain issue, his hand reaches up and begins to slowly stroke the back of his neck. Or perhaps he brushes an invisible piece of lint off his trousers. He might adjust his watch, smooth his tie, or repeatedly tuck a strand of hair behind his ear. These grooming behaviors have absolutely nothing to do with personal vanity. The neck, the face, and the arms are rich with nerve endings. By stroking or rubbing these areas, the deceiver is stimulating those nerves, sending a temporary calming signal to their overwhelmed brain. It is the adult equivalent of a frightened child clutching a security blanket. If a person is generally fidgety, you might see these behaviors throughout a conversation. But remember the unforgiving rule of timing. If they sit perfectly still for 20 minutes and only begin violently adjusting their collar 3 seconds after you ask about the missing money, you are not witnessing a wardrobe malfunction. You are witnessing a massive internal spike of anxiety leaking out through their fingertips. The most vulnerable point of human connection is the eyes, and therefore the eyes are heavily involved in the physicality of a lie. Society tells us that a liar cannot look you in the eye. That is a dangerous myth. Many seasoned deceivers know this myth perfectly well, and they will deliberately maintain intense, unblinking eye contact while lying to you, aggressively trying to prove their honesty. The true indicator of deception is not a lack of eye contact, but a sudden, highly specific need to shield the eyes precisely when the lie is being delivered. When a person knows they are deceiving you, looking into your eyes causes them immense psychological shame and stress. Their biological instinct is to hide from the danger. You will see this shielding in incredibly subtle ways. A person might answer your question while suddenly bringing their hand up to their face, casually resting their fingers over their eyes or shading their brow. They might drop their eyelids, closing their eyes for a full long second while pronouncing their innocence. This is not a slow blink. It is a subconscious attempt to momentarily shut out the world. They are pulling down the psychological blinds because they cannot bear to watch your face as they deliver the untruth. If their eyes break contact, look at the exact timing. If they stare at you comfortably the entire conversation, but look down at their shoes at the exact syllable they deny the accusation, that break in eye contact was triggered by the lie. Finally, you must be attuned to the autonomic nervous system, the deep, internal plumbing of the human body that is almost impossible to consciously control. When the adrenaline of a lie hits the bloodstream, it changes the physical landscape of the body. The salivary glands instantly shut down, turning the mouth into a desert. You will see the person's throat work as they are forced to swallow hard, trying to clear the sudden dryness. You might see the sudden, rapid pulse in the carotid artery on the side of their neck, beating like a trapped bird. You might see a sudden, fine sheen of sweat break out on their upper lip or forehead, or notice their breathing become shallow and rapid as their lungs demand more oxygen for the anticipated fight. No human being is a perfect machine. Nobody can fully suppress the explosive biological reality of fear. But you must always remember the golden rule: a single physical cue means nothing. If a person shifts in their chair, they might just have a bad back. If they swallow hard, they might just be thirsty. Your power lies in observing the cluster. When you ask the hard question, and within 5 seconds you see them break their anchor point, rub the back of their neck, and close their eyes as they give you a non-answer, you have just witnessed a symphony of deception. You have watched the mind fail to contain the lie and the body ultimately confess the truth. Chapter 7. Spying the truth in the lie. The human mind is a surprisingly terrible vault for a secret. When a person is harboring a deception, they are constantly carrying the agonizing weight of that hidden truth. They must carefully guard it, constantly checking to ensure it has not slipped out. But this intense, laser-like focus on maintaining the lie often produces a fascinating and deeply revealing phenomenon. The deceiver will accidentally tell you the truth. In their desperate effort to construct a perfect illusion, they become so obsessed with the literal meaning of their words that they completely lose sight of the broader message they are sending. If you train your ear to listen past the surface of the conversation, you will discover that hidden inside almost every sophisticated lie is a quiet, unintended confession. To understand how this happens, you must recognize the profound difference in how honest and deceptive people communicate. An honest person communicates with the simple goal of being understood. They want you to know the facts, so they speak broadly and plainly. A deceptive person, however, communicates entirely for survival. They are terrified of being trapped by their own words, so they become fiercely literal. They will listen to your question with the precision of a defense attorney looking for a loophole. If they can find a way to answer your exact, literal words without technically telling a lie, they will take it, believing they have successfully outsmarted you. Imagine you are managing a small retail store, and you discover that a significant amount of cash is missing from the safe at the end of the night. You bring in the shift supervisor, a young man who was solely responsible for closing up. You look him in the eye and ask, "Did you take the money out of the safe?" He looks back at you, shaking his head, and says, "I never even opened the safe." On the surface, this sounds like a complete, rock-solid denial. He is giving you a definitive statement. But look closer at the absolute literalness of his words. You did not ask him if he opened the safe. You asked him if he took the money. By specifically denying the act of opening the door, he has left a massive, gaping hole in his narrative. The unintended message he just sent you is that the safe was already unlocked, or someone else opened it, and he simply reached in and took the cash. He feels psychologically victorious because he technically did not lie about opening the safe, but he has inadvertently handed you the exact thread you need to unravel his deception. This profound literalness often manifests as a psychological alibi. When a person is guilty, they are often tormented by their own conscience. They want to lie to you to survive, but they also want to minimize the moral damage to their own soul. So they will use phrasing that creates a backdoor escape from reality. If you ask a business partner if they have been quietly negotiating with a competitor behind your back, and they reply, "Why would I do that when we are making so much money here?" They have delivered a masterclass in the unintended message. The intended message is that they are loyal. But the unintended literal message is a staggering confession. They are motivated entirely by the money, and if the competitor offers them more, they will absolutely betray you. They have not denied the negotiation, they have merely explained their pricing. There is an even more powerful way to expose these unintended messages, a psychological tool that reaches right into the deepest, most vulnerable part of the deceiver's mind. It is called the punishment question. When a destructive act has occurred, a theft, a leaked document, a broken promise, you do not ask the person if they did it. Instead, you ask them to act as the judge. You look at them and ask, "What do you think should happen to the person who did this?" This single question completely alters the psychological battlefield. You are no longer an interrogator, you are asking for their advice. When you ask an innocent person the punishment question, their reaction is swift, definitive, and often harsh. An innocent person feels aggrieved. The wrongful act has caused chaos in their environment, and they want justice. If you ask an honest employee what should happen to the person who stole the cash, they will not hesitate. They will say, "You need to fire them immediately," or "You should call the police." They have no problem dropping the hammer because they know with absolute certainty that the hammer is not going to fall on them. But when you ask a deceptive person the exact same question, they experience a catastrophic internal crisis. They know who the guilty person is. It is them. If they say, "Fire them" or "Call the police," they are literally looking you in the eye and demanding their own execution. The human ego and the primal survival instinct simply will not allow them to do this. The psychological weight of sentencing themselves to ruin is too heavy to bear. So, their mind scrambles for a compromise. They will attempt to soften the blow, suggesting a punishment that they themselves could comfortably survive. They will look away, shift their weight, and say, well, maybe they are going through a hard time at home, or perhaps they should have to pay it back and get a written warning, or I guess it depends on why they did it. Listen to the breathtaking magnitude of that unintended message. They are negotiating their own sentence right in front of you. They are pleading for leniency before they have even been accused. By trying to protect themselves from a hypothetical punishment, they have completely exposed their guilt. They have surrendered their absolute defense in exchange for a lighter penalty. Spying the truth in the lie requires you to stop arguing with the deceiver. It requires you to stop fighting against the current of their deception and start listening to where the water is actually flowing. When you tune your ear to the literal meaning of their words, when you recognize the psychological alibis they build to protect their conscience, and when you dare to ask them to pass judgment on their own hidden sins, you strip away their power. You do not have to break them down, because if you listen closely enough, they will always, inevitably, break themselves down. Chapter 8. The Art of Strategic Elicitation. You can possess the most profound understanding of human behavior in the world. You can know exactly how to listen for the discordant soundtrack of a lie, and you can be perfectly attuned to the subtle physical tremors of a mind under stress. But all of that knowledge is utterly useless if you do not know how to generate the behavior in the first place. Think of a doctor attempting to test a patient's reflexes. The doctor knows exactly what a healthy reflex looks like, but the patient cannot voluntarily make their knee jerk in the correct way. The doctor must strike a very specific nerve at a very precise angle with the right amount of force to compel the body to reveal its underlying condition. In the pursuit of truth, your questions are the reflex hammer. If you do not know how to strike the psychological nerve, the deception will remain buried forever in the silence of what was never asked. The greatest obstacle most people face in finding the truth is not that they are easily fooled. It is that they are deeply terrified of asking the necessary questions. We are socially conditioned to be polite, to avoid confrontation, and to respect boundaries. When we suspect someone of a betrayal, we often engage in a painful, exhausting dance of avoidance. We drop subtle hints. We ask vague, open-ended questions, hoping the other person will spontaneously decide to confess and save us the emotional agony of a direct accusation. But a deceiver will never step into the light voluntarily. If you leave them any room to hide, they will take it. If you want the truth, you must learn the architecture of inquiry. You must stop hoping for a confession and start engineering a conversation that safely and surgically corners the lie. The foundational tool in this architecture is the presumptive question. When we suspect someone of a wrongdoing, our natural instinct is to ask a definitive yes or no question. We ask, "Did you take the file?" or "Did you lie to the client?" By framing the question this way, we are handing the deceiver a tremendous psychological advantage. We are offering them a binary choice, and it is incredibly easy for a guilty person to simply choose no. They have been anticipating that exact question, and their denial is fully prepared. To bypass this defense, you must change the premise of the engagement. You do not ask if they did the act. You structure your question to presume that they have already done it, and you ask for a detail surrounding the event. Imagine you are managing a vital project, and you discover that highly confidential internal data has been leaked to a direct competitor. You suspect a specific team member who recently lost out on a major promotion. If you sit them down and ask, "Did you leak the data?" you are inviting a fight. They will immediately deny it and retreat behind a wall of outrage. Instead, you look them directly in the eye, your voice completely calm, and you ask a presumptive question. When you sent that data to the competitor, what was the primary reason you felt it was necessary? Notice the profound shift in power. You have completely bypassed the question of their guilt and moved the conversation to their motivation. The human brain, when suddenly confronted with a reality it thought was hidden, experiences a massive, debilitating shock. An innocent person will aggressively reject the entire premise. They will say, "Wait, what are you talking about? I never sent any data to anyone." They will fight the presumption immediately, but a guilty person's brain will freeze. Their prepared no longer fits the lock of your question. Because you asked about their motivation, their mind furiously scrambles to process how much you actually know. In that critical 5-second window, their body and their voice will leak a massive cluster of deceptive behaviors as they struggle to adapt to the terrifying new reality that their secret is out. Equally powerful, though requiring even more finesse, is the use of the bait question. The bait question is a psychological trap designed to leverage the unknown. It involves introducing a hypothetical, highly plausible piece of evidence into the conversation, entirely to see how the person reacts to the possibility of its existence. We live in a world where almost every action leaves a footprint: digital logs, security cameras, financial paper trails, or observant neighbors. A guilty person is constantly tormented by the fear that they left a trace behind. You can use that fear to flush out the truth. Suppose you suspect an employee of falsifying their time logs by claiming they were working late in the office when they were actually leaving hours early. You could argue with them indefinitely about their schedule, but a deceiver will simply insist they were working. Instead, you introduce the bait. You say, "As part of the new security audit, IT is pulling the digital logs of all keycard swipes at the front door. Is there any reason those digital logs would show you leaving the building at 3 o'clock on Thursday?" You have not accused them of lying. You have simply introduced an objective, terrifying piece of potential evidence, the keycard log, and asked if there is a reason it might contradict their story. An innocent person has absolutely nothing to fear from objective evidence. If they were working late, they will welcome the logs. They will look you in the eye and say, "No, there is no reason at all. Go ahead and check the logs. They will show I was here until 8. Their answer will be swift and absolute. But watch carefully what happens to the guilty person. The bait question strikes terror into their heart. They know they left early, and now they are faced with the horrifying possibility that an undeniable digital record exists. Because they cannot fight the computer system, they must instantly pivot their strategy. They must build an excuse for why the evidence will look bad for them. They will hesitate, look away and say, "Well, I might have swiped out to grab a coffee from my car," or, "Actually, there was a problem with the front door on Thursday, so the system might be glitching." They are frantically trying to explain away the evidence before you have even presented it. By asking if there is a reason the evidence would contradict them, you have forced them to accidentally confess that their original story was a lie. Mastering strategic elicitation requires you to view a difficult conversation not as a confrontation, but as a carefully orchestrated environment where you control the lighting and the exits. You do not begin with the hardest question. You start broad, establishing a baseline of truth by asking comfortable, non-threatening questions about their day or their work. You let them settle into their normal rhythm of communication. Once they are relaxed, you surgically drop the presumptive or bait question into the middle of the conversation. You deliver the stimulus without anger, without judgment, and without raising your voice. You simply place the question on the table like a heavy stone, and then you step back and watch the ripples. You stop being a passive victim of their narrative, and you become the active architect of the truth. Chapter 9. Controlling the narrative. There is a singular, electric moment in any difficult conversation that changes everything. It is the moment you ask the right question, observe the physical and auditory cluster of deception, and realize with absolute certainty that the person sitting across from you is hiding the truth. Your heart will inevitably race. The adrenaline will flood your system. Your deeply human instinct, fueled by the triumphant thrill of discovery, will be to slam your hand on the table, point your finger and say, "I know you are lying." It is the climax of every courtroom drama and television show we have ever watched. But in the fragile reality of human psychology, yielding to that dramatic instinct is the single most destructive thing you can do. If you attack in that moment, you do not win the truth. You annihilate it. When a deceptive person realizes that you are closing in on their secret, they are standing on a psychological cliff. They are terrified, off balance, and desperately looking for a way to survive. If you push them, if you aggressively accuse them, shame them, or demand a confession, their primal survival instinct will force them to jump. but they do not jump into the abyss of a confession. They jump into the fortified bunker of entrenchment. Entrenchment is the psychological state where a person firmly, loudly, and definitively denies an accusation out loud. Once a human being looks you in the eye and says, "I absolutely did not do this," their ego locks the door and swallows the key. To admit guilt 5 minutes after delivering a passionate, righteous denial requires a level of humility and humiliation that most human beings simply cannot endure. They will carry that lie to the grave rather than admit they were lying to your face moments earlier. Therefore, your ultimate goal in navigating a deceptive conversation is to forcefully prevent the other person from ever uttering a definitive denial. You must manage their ego because they are completely incapable of managing it themselves. You must take complete control of the narrative, acting not as their adversary, but as their psychological guide. This requires a profound shift in your own mindset. You must momentarily suspend your moral judgment about their actions and focus entirely on creating an emotional off-ramp that allows them to surrender without completely destroying their self-worth. Imagine you are leading a critical engineering project, designing a bridge that will serve a major metropolitan area. Millions of dollars and thousands of lives are dependent on the integrity of your team's work. A few weeks before the final safety review, you discover that a series of crucial stress tests on the steel cables were never actually performed. The data in the final report was simply copied from an older, entirely different project. The digital footprint leads directly back to your most senior, trusted engineer, a man who has been a mentor to younger staff and a pillar of the company for decades. If you call him into your office and angrily demand to know why he falsified the safety data, his career flashes before his eyes. The sheer terror of losing his pension, his reputation, and his identity will force his mouth to open and deny the undeniable. He will claim there was a computer glitch or that a junior assistant must have uploaded the wrong file. He will entrench himself and the project will be paralyzed by a massive, hostile investigation. To control the narrative, you must approach him with a completely different strategy. You must use what is known as a question prologue. A prologue is a carefully crafted monologue delivered immediately before you ask your difficult question. Its purpose is to fundamentally alter the emotional landscape of the room. You sit the engineer down, and before he can say a word, you begin to talk about the crushing, agonizing pressure of the industry. You talk about how the deadlines on this project have been completely unrealistic from the start, how the client has been demanding the impossible, and how easy it is for an overworked, exhausted professional to feel backed into a corner. You build a bridge of intense empathy. You systematically dismantle the idea that the falsified data was an act of malicious sabotage, and you reframe it as a desperate mistake made by a good person buckling under impossible circumstances. You are engaging in the powerful art of minimization and rationalization. You are not legally or ethically excusing the behavior. Falsifying bridge data is a catastrophic failure, but you are temporarily minimizing the moral shame attached to it. You are offering the engineer a narrative that allows him to save face. When you provide a rationalization, you are giving the deceiver a choice between two distinct identities. They can either confess and be seen as an overwhelmed, stressed employee who made a bad call trying to keep the project on track, or they can continue to lie and be seen as a cold, calculating saboteur. Human beings will always instinctively grab the lifeline of the lesser evil. Once you have delivered the prologue, once you have flooded the room with understanding and normalized the pressure they were under, you transition seamlessly into the presumptive question. You do not ask if he faked the report. You look at him, your voice calm and supportive, and you say, "When you copied the data from the previous project, were you just trying to buy the team enough time to actually run the real tests before the deadline?" Listen to the sheer psychological leverage in that moment. You are not asking him to confess to a crime, you are asking him to confirm a noble intention. You have completely neutralized the terror of the cliff moment. You have wrapped the harsh, jagged reality of his deception in the soft, protective blanket of your understanding. When an exhausted, terrified person is offered a way out that preserves a tiny fragment of their dignity, the overwhelming relief they feel will shatter their defenses. They will exhale, drop their shoulders and say, "Yes, I just needed more time." The client was going to pull the funding. And in that quiet, devastating moment, you have the absolute truth. Controlling the narrative requires an immense amount of discipline and emotional maturity. You must entirely abandon your own ego. You cannot care about looking like the smartest person in the room, and you cannot indulge your desire to punish the deceiver in the moment of discovery. Your anger is the deceiver's greatest shield. Your empathy is the weapon that will disarm them completely. When you master the art of the prologue, when you learn to minimize the shame and rationalize the failure, you stop fighting against the desperate, thrashing energy of a cornered mind. Instead, you gently take their hand, guide them away from the precipice of entrenchment, and walk them safely out of the dark and into the light of the truth. Chapter 10. Navigating the complexities of real life. You are now standing at a profound threshold. You have systematically dismantled the comforting illusions that cloud human communication. You understand the paradox of ignoring the truth to find the lie. You know how to listen for the discordant soundtrack of evasion, how to observe the explosive physicality of fear, and how to safely navigate a terrified mind away from the cliff of entrenchment. But acquiring this knowledge in the quiet sanctuary of your own mind is very different from walking out your front door and applying it in the chaotic, emotionally charged, wildly unpredictable arena of real life. As you step back into the world, you must be prepared for the immense responsibility, the unexpected pitfalls, and the profound moral weight that comes with finally seeing things exactly as they are. The first and most jarring reality you will encounter is what many describe as the heavy burden of awareness. Once you tune your ears to the subtle frequencies of deception, you can never truly unhear them. You will suddenly notice the stalling tactics in a casual conversation with your neighbor. You will hear the non-answer statements from a salesperson at a car dealership. You will see the physical anchor points shift when you ask a family member a seemingly innocent question at the dinner table. It is like putting on a pair of high-definition glasses for the first time. The world becomes vividly clear, but you are also forced to see the dirt in the corners that you previously ignored. In this newly illuminated world, your greatest danger is not that you will be fooled, but that you will become a cynic. If you begin to treat every single human interaction as a hostile interrogation, you will isolate yourself entirely. You must remember that human beings are fragile, and not every deception is a malicious act designed to cause you harm. Society is built on a complex scaffolding of minor polite fictions. When a friend cooks you a terrible meal and asks how you like it, and they exhibit a cluster of deceptive behaviors when they tell you they followed the recipe perfectly, you do not deploy a presumptive question to crush them. You exercise grace. The tools you have learned are a powerful shield to protect you from devastation, not a sword to strike down every human frailty you encounter. You must choose your battles wisely, reserving your analytical rigor for the conversations where your financial, emotional, or physical well-being is genuinely at stake. As you begin to apply these tools to those high-stakes situations, you must aggressively guard against the temptation to revert to your old habits. The human brain is lazy, and it desperately wants to fall back into global behavior assessment. You will find yourself watching a public figure being interviewed on television, and you will suddenly declare them a liar because they rubbed their nose and looked away from the camera. You must stop yourself immediately. Unless you are the person delivering the stimulus, and unless you can precisely measure the exact millisecond that the stimulus lands, you cannot accurately apply the 5-second rule. You do not know if the politician on television is reacting to the interviewer's question or to a chaotic distraction off camera. Passive observation is a dangerous game of guesswork. To truly know, you must be the architect of the conversation. You must deliver the stimulus directly, and you must hold yourself to the unforgiving discipline of the cluster and the clock. To truly understand how this delicate architecture holds up under the crushing weight of real life, imagine a scenario that plays out in businesses and homes every single day. Consider two lifelong friends, Sarah and Mark, who spent a decade building a small, highly successful creative agency together. Recently, a devastating blow has landed. Their largest, most lucrative client abruptly left them for a rival firm. Rumors begin to swirl that the rival firm possessed intimately detailed knowledge of Sarah and Mark's proprietary financial models, knowledge that only the two founders possessed. The evidence points heavily to Mark, who has been struggling with crushing personal debt. Sarah is faced with a nightmare. If she relies on her emotional bias, she will either blindly defend her friend and lose her company, or she will attack him in a rage and destroy a 10-year partnership on a mere suspicion. Instead, she chooses the discipline of the methodology. She invites Mark to a quiet, private lunch. She does not begin with an accusation. She starts with casual baseline conversation about their families and the weather, allowing his nervous system to settle. Then she gently places the stimulus on the table. She looks at him calmly and says, "Mark, did you share our financial models with the rival firm?" Within 3 seconds, the biological reality of fear takes over. Mark violently shifts his weight, pulling his chair an inch away from the table. He clears his throat, breaking eye contact to stare intently at his water glass, and says, "Sarah, we have known each other for 15 years. I have poured my blood, sweat, and tears into this agency, and I would never do anything to jeopardize our friendship." If Sarah were not trained, she would be overwhelmed by the guilt of suspecting her loyal friend, but she is trained. She recognizes the physical anchor break. She hears the failure to answer the specific question. She identifies the blinding lie of influence, weaponizing their 15-year friendship. She has her cluster. She knows with absolute heartbreaking certainty that her friend has betrayed her. Her natural human instinct is to scream at him, to call him a thief, and to demand he confess. But she knows that if she pushes him off that psychological cliff, he will entrench himself. He will deny it until his dying breath, and she will be locked in a paralyzing, years-long legal battle. So she suppresses her anger. She manages his ego. She leans forward, her voice thick with genuine empathy, and delivers a masterful prologue. She talks about the agonizing stress of the industry. She talks about how the pressure of personal debt can make a good person feel like they are drowning, and how sometimes, in a moment of pure panic, people make desperate choices just to keep their heads above water. She minimizes the moral shame of the betrayal, reframing it as a momentary lapse in judgment born of overwhelming stress. Mark stops fidgeting. He looks up from his glass. The tension in his jaw softens. He is listening. Then, Sarah delivers the presumptive question. She does not ask if he did it. She asks for the motivation. "Mark," she says softly, "when you gave them the models, were you just trying to secure a signing bonus so you could finally pay off the bank and get out from under all that debt?" Mark sits in the agonizing silence. The reality of his guilt is trapped between the undeniable truth of his actions and the profound grace of her understanding. He takes a long, shuddering breath. He nods, tears finally welling in his eyes, and whispers, "Yes, I just needed the bank to stop calling." In that moment, Sarah has achieved something extraordinary. She has protected her company, uncovered the absolute truth, and surprisingly preserved a fragment of Mark's humanity in the process. She did not destroy him to get the answer. She guided him out of the darkness. This is the ultimate purpose of mastering this profound understanding of human behavior. It is not about becoming a cold, calculating machine that roams the world looking for liars to punish. It is about taking back control of your own reality. For too long, you have been at the mercy of people who sought to manipulate your empathy, weaponize your biases, and blind you with their charm. You no longer have to live in that state of vulnerability. You are now equipped to walk into the most difficult, terrifying conversations of your life with a quiet, unshakable confidence. When you strip away the illusions, when you ignore the beautiful distractions and focus entirely on the hard, measurable reality of cause and effect, you give yourself the greatest gift a human being can possess: clarity. You will know who to trust in business, who to welcome into your home, and who to safely distance yourself from. You will build a life surrounded by genuine authenticity because you are no longer afraid of the shadows. You have learned to spy the truth in the lie, and in doing so, you have finally set yourself free.